were you surprised by Norris's margin of victory, especially when you consider that he lost the lead on the start? In a way, he pulled a Verstappen-like beatdown. I'm Verstappen.
Yeah, I was definitely surprised by Norris's win, especially because of the start. Norris just didn't have the launch that he needed to maintain his position of pole, but he certainly had the pace to catch up to Verstappen. I think it's important to point out, Kobe, you said a Verstappen-like beatdown on Verstappen. I think that's completely true. I think it's important to point out that it was the first time a driver other than Max Verstappen himself has won by more than a 10-second margin in almost 2.5 years. I believe the last time was Charles Leclerc in the Australian Grand Prix. I think that the fact that Norris was able to win by double that margin with his pace today is what really surprised me, especially after losing the start and only gaining his lead on lap 18. I think that fact alone shows McLaren's competitiveness with Red Bull this season, especially given that it was Verstappen's home track. But I think it'll be interesting to see if they can maintain this for the rest of the season. Ben, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, for sure, Linnea. And I think that, you hit the nail on the head there, and I'll even go one further. I think it's the largest margin of victory, period, by a non-Verstappen driver since Lewis Hamilton in Saudi Arabia in 2021. If I have my stats right there, I feel like I saw that on motorsport.com. They were bringing up the margin again. Just incredible, especially considering that this is Verstappen's backyard. He had the entire crowd. I mean, believe me, those orange, that sea of orange that you saw in the grandstands, those maybe some McLaren fans in there, but they're primarily Dutch fans cheering on their home driver and Max Verstappen. And it's as big of a home court or home field advantage, so to speak, as you can possibly imagine. That's why I think we all picked Verstappen to win this race. And I almost fired up that tweet again after he led into the opening corner, like Max Verstappen wins the Dutch Grand Prix in all caps, because I thought that was it, that he was just going to drive away and be home free there. But that pace that Norris showed in qualifying with that McLaren fired back up, and he got the lead back again and never looked back. And not only did he never look back, he drove away. It was never in doubt. And the fact that it happened at the Dutch Grand Prix, I think this is a massive wake-up call. I still think Verstappen is the championship favorite. We'll get into that here in just a moment. But, again, it's going to be a situation where you don't want to count your chickens before they hatch here. And who would have thought that we would be talking after the Dutch Grand Prix about Max Verstappen having a real championship battle that he's got to watch out for? I thought he maybe would have the championship clinched at this point. He was going to be so dominant. Even Sergio Perez was racking up second place finishes at the start of the year. It looked like Red Bull had an insurmountable lead over the rest of the field here. I certainly didn't expect McLaren to be the team that was going to take the fight to them. But here we are. Lando Norris picks up another win today and continues to close that gap and continues to tease us that maybe, just maybe, we're going to actually get an actual championship battle to close out this year. It's absolutely remarkable.
Yeah, and to his credit, our own Joshua Birch called this, just over a year ago. Remember, Ben? Our own Joshua Birch said that when Red Bull got that penalty with the cost cap, he said when we get a little deeper into the 2024 season, that's when you'll start to see Red Bull's advantage go away. And he called that to a T. So well done there, Josh. I know a lot of us, at the time we were thinking, yeah, right, that's probably going to happen. But look where we are now. Exactly what Josh said back then has come true. I'm going to try to go back on our YouTube channel and try to find that clip of Josh saying it, but it probably is going to be a very difficult challenge. But it's been quite a surprise this year in 2024 after the first few races. Ben, Linnea, I was thinking that, yeah, this season's already over. I said Max Verstappen is going to dominate this season. And by the time we get to summer break, the championship's already going to be over. But it really seems like, McLaren has a car that can truly take the fight to Red Bull on a more consistent basis now. And if McLaren keeps this up, there's no telling what the points are going to look like at the end of the season. It definitely surprised me that Lando Norris was able to pull away from Verstappen once he got by him, never looking back. And I also want to look at this situation as, looking at Lando Norris and how much he's grown as a driver. You remember that race back in Russia when it looked like that he was going to win that one, and ended up throwing it away. And we've seen time and time again, when he wasn't battling for the win, it was battling for a good points finish and ended up throwing that away as well. Now Lando Norris is, starting to develop those closer skills where he can where he can go out there, do what he needs to do, not make the mistakes, and end up getting the race victory. And that's exactly what we saw today. So it was a job well done by Norris. So I wanted to ask you a follow-up. I'm going to start off with you this time, Ben. Does Norris's victory today prove that McLaren is a threat not only for the Constructors' Championship, but perhaps the Drivers' Championship as well.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think the constructors, you can almost say, even though Red Bull still has the slight advantage here, I think if looking at it here, it's only down to 30 points. But with where Perez is running, he hasn't had a top 4 finish since Miami earlier this season. That shows you just how much of a struggle it's been for him. I think this was actually his best finish since Miami here, 6th place today, which just really puts into perspective how much he's been struggling. So, I think that the constructors is certainly tilting in favor of McLaren here, even though Red Bull still has a slight lead. I think McLaren have overtaken them as the favorites to win the constructors this year. In terms of the drivers, I think, looking at the math here, Norris could win every race. Verstappen could finish second in every race. All he would need to do is follow Norris home. And I think Verstappen, I don't have the exact figures off the top of my head here. I think Verstappen would still win the championship by about 6 or 7 points. So if Max does everything that he needs to do, he still has almost a 3-race gap in terms of, getting 25 points for when he's up 70 now on Norris. It's certainly his to lose. But if Max Verstappen continues to have race weekends where the Red Bull just doesn't take to the track for whatever reason, he only is able to come away with 4th or 5th place points, doesn't even finish on the podium. And if McLaren can do what Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari could not do in 2017 and 2018, and maximize every weekend, be mistake-free, get their strategies right, and continue racking off podiums, and especially those race wins, I think it's certainly within reach. Now, Red Bull certainly also have an advantage in terms of their second car. If they decide that the constructors is out of reach, I think they're going to have no problem telling Sergio Perez to pit from 5th or 6th place on the last lap to take the fastest lap point away from Lando Norris, and that could potentially play in the Red Bull's favor as well. I mean, we saw Verstappen and Hamilton in 2021. They went into the last race tied down to the half point. So don't think that those fastest lap points might not come back to make a difference. Maybe don't think that Oscar Piastri's win in Hungary might not come back to make a difference here. I mean, if Norris loses this championship, you better hope he loses it by more than 7 points, because then we're going to be talking about that whole team orders debate once again as well. So when it comes to constructors, I think McLaren are now solidly the favorites. I still think Verstappen is the driver's favorite, but it is by no means over, and we're going to have to wait and see over these next few races. This is a very critical stretch. If Lando Norris can go out, win a couple more races, and further establish himself as somebody that can be a weekly contender, if McLaren can do the same thing, the championship fight, as far as I'm concerned, on the driver's side, is wide open.
Yeah, I think I also agree. McLaren is definitely on the radar for constructors and the Constructors' Championship. And I think given Norris's performance today, I think he could definitely be considered for the drivers as well. McLaren had the pace today, but it is important to point out that Verstappen did still have a better jump at the start. Ben, you mentioned that Verstappen basically just needs to follow Norris home, if the math on that is correct. And he needs to do what he needs to do. And historically, Verstappen is incredibly good at doing that. So I think it is more of a toss-up for the Drivers' Championship. I think there's more wiggle room there, and Verstappen is still the favorite for that. I think next week we have Monza, which is a notoriously difficult track, and Verstappen did win that last year. And I think that he'll be a lot more aggressive, given that he just lost at his home track. So you never know how the rest of the season will play out, but I do think McLaren made a really big statement with their pace today. And then also for the constructors, it's important, like you mentioned, Ben, to consider their teammates, how Checo's doing, and also Piastri, which we're going to get into in a second.
Yeah, for sure. But I also agree that McLaren is definitely going to be a threat for the Constructors' Championship. And looking at the Drivers' Championship, like we were saying during the IndyCar section about Alex Palou, that is probably, he's likely to be the IndyCar champion, but you just never know. And just I can't even talk, but it's the exact same thing in Formula One with Max Verstappen. He's probably still going to end up winning the championship, but like you're saying, Ben, it's not over at all yet. There's no telling what's going to happen moving forward, and that's what I really like about Formula One right now. The unpredictability is finally back for the first time since 2021, which is absolutely fantastic for all the people who love Formula One all over the world. For the longest time now, it seemed like it's just been the Max Verstappen show, and that it was a guaranteed Max victory almost every single race, minus some circumstances happening every now and then. But now you go into Formula One Grand Prix races, these last handful of races, you have no idea who's going to win. I wouldn't have predicted at the beginning of the year that Max Verstappen would have gone winless for over 2 months, and a winless streak that still continues to go on as we head into the next race weekend. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in this championship battle moving forward. Are we going to find out that Red Bull made their own decision to keep Sergio Perez and not replace him with someone who can be a little bit more consistent at car and get them the points they need in the Constructors Championship? Yeah, so there's still a whole bunch of questions that are going to be answered as we get deeper into the 2024 Formula One season. And while it was all smiles for Norris, his teammate Oscar Piastri was unable to join him on the podium because Piastri, he slipped back to fourth behind Ferrari's Charles Leclerc. Linnea, when McLaren has a car that can beat Verstappen by over 20 seconds, does Piastri need to make sure he's finishing on the podium to pull his weight in the constructors' title fight? I'm sure Oscar Piastri doesn't want to become McLaren's version of Sergio Perez, but I wouldn't even label him as that right now.
Yeah, I think that Piastri definitely needs to make sure he's pulling his weight. P4 did gain McLaren good points, but when Norris's car is more than 20 seconds ahead of Verstappen, you'd kind of expect that pace to also be reflected in Piastri's car. Going back to what was mentioned in the pre-race discussion, actually, it was kind of like discussed about a possible McLaren 1-2 finish, and it was said that it was very dependent on the start of the race. I think this is exactly true. Although Norris lost the first place position, he was able to hold on to Verstappen and gain it back, where Piastri did slip back into fourth. So I think going forward, I think there would be a lot more pressure on Piastri to start getting podium finishes to keep them up. But I do think he's still definitely getting McLaren the good points that they need.
Yeah, I don't know if it says much, Oscar Piastri not pulling his weight, because he did still finish fourth today, and like we mentioned, Checo hasn't been able to say that since Miami, for crying out loud, despite the fact that, well, Red Bull, he could maybe argue, now only have the second best car. They still have a very good car, and Checo has not been able to maximize that. I think the driver of the day was Charles Leclerc, not Lando Norris, with all due respect. Don't get me wrong, Norris was absolutely sensational to have that margin of victory on Max Verstappen, but Charles Leclerc, I think it's become clear at this point, Ferrari are certainly in the bottom half of the top four big four teams here, so to speak. I know Leclerc obviously got his victory earlier this year, as did Carlos Sainz, but the pace the last few races has made it very clear and very apparent, I think, that the battle is between McLaren and Red Bull, and you could maybe even argue Mercedes has had more pace over the last several weekends. I know they didn't have such a great weekend here in Zandvoort, but Leclerc to get a podium for Ferrari, I think, absolutely massive. He would have been my vote for driver of the day. And you do have to look at Oscar Piastri letting him get that podium, despite the fact that Piastri started in third, and think, these points are super valuable. Maybe he probably should have been there with his teammate up on the podium and hung on to that third place spot. So I think that Piastri certainly needs to do a better job of making sure that he's on the podium as much as he possibly can be, considering McLaren probably have the best car at a lot of the tracks that we're going to right now. But at the same time, I don't think you need to hit the panic button or ring the alarm bells for Oscar Piastri here either. Fourth place is still a very solid day. Like Linnea said, it does get McLaren 12 solid championship points on their constructors battle. And when you look at it this way, Norris beat Verstappen and Piastri still beat Perez. So that's really all he needs to do to continue to close the gap. And there's plenty of time left to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Oscar Piastri is going to be perfectly fine. And it's funny that, we're talking about Piastri in this way, because it was just last year on this show, we were asking if Oscar Piastri was the number one driver over Lando Norris. And now we're talking about Piastri needing to pull his weight in the constructors title fight. I don't really have much more to add there, but really looking forward to seeing what Norris and Piastri are able to do here down the stretch. And I think the constructors title battle is just going to continue to get tighter and tighter. And as we get down to the wire, it's going to be fun to watch and see if McLaren can truly take the fight to Red Bull and get around them in the constructors. I have a feeling, if we get the gap down, to like one race gap, you're going to start seeing Red Bull, pulling their hairs out, and they're going to go into like a mini panic mode here because they want this constructors title. Entering the season, we thought Red Bull had the drivers and constructors championship locked down before we even did lights out and away we go at the start of this season. Yeah, so it's gonna be fun.